Hi, I want to welcome you to our conversation today as part of the study sessions for the group for the book Pressing Forward. We're glad that you've chosen to work with this book in a study series with your congregation. My name is Denise Jansen. I teach Christian education at the School of Theology at Virginia Union University and have had the pleasure of working on this book with my colleague Carmichael.
Yes, I'm Carmichael Crutchfield, and I teach at Memphis Theological Seminary, where I teach Christian education, spiritual formation, and youth ministry. And certainly it's been my pleasure to be working with Denise on this book, Pressing Forward.
So we have some questions that we've asked you to respond to as part of the study session. And I want to invite Carmichael to respond to this as well. So the question that participants started today's session with was, share an experience from your adolescence growing up in the church. What do you remember about church from your adolescence?
I remember the singing, um, and my church and other churches that I went to, there was always this robust singing from groups of people. There would be a choir that might be made up of a variety of people, ages possibly, but most often there was a youth choir, and then there was an adult choir and a male choir, and what I recall so vividly is that my father was a singer. He was an excellent singer, and sometimes sung solos, but most time the choir sung together. And I think that's what really I remember so much. So I guess because I measure that today when I see singing, and I see what I remember growing up was the singing, and I think probably more than anything, I mean, I never was a singer, but I didn't have a choice but to be in the choir as a youth, because all youth had to be in the choir. And what I remember about them was the choir rehearsals. I wouldn't want to say intense, but they were serious. The musician really didn't play around with that music. So that's what I remember, and how that even today, I mean, I remember songs because of that youth choir. Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. Choir is a vital part of worship in the Black church, and worship is serious business. We don't mess around, right?
Right, don't mess around. No, I know any means.
So today we're talking about God's action and human action as a part of our inquiry into the role of the church in the lives of African American adolescents. And as I think about God's action and human action, I'm reminded of a story from our interviews. A person that I talked with, I'll call her Amanda, and she told a story of the impact of the church in her adolescence was just being in the room. She remembers an early morning prayer call where one of the church mothers was praying, and she could feel the intensity of that person's belief that God was going to do what she was asking, that God was going to respond in the situation. And that feeling that this person was so passionate, believed so passionately that God was there, going to be a part of the solution, that really moved her and continues to move her today as she understands the role of the church in her life as a young adult. That really stood out for me as just sometimes it's just being in the room
Yes.
and experiencing the power of the belief system of another person.
Yeah.
I wonder if you have anything that comes to mind from our interviews.
Yeah. I can tell that comes to mind is that as a young person, as I have maybe said before, I grew up in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, where it's a connectional church, and where um, what the connection I saw with God and with humans, and the action that took place was that uh, every once in a while, well, not every once in a while, once a year, we got to go to district meetings or annual conferences and connect with people from different places, and for people who grew up in the rural area to connect with people in the city. And even I remember and recall staying in homes of people and really getting to know people and making connections, and later found out that these people were, I mean, they just weren't normal people. They were real important people doing important things. And I saw then as a young person that the church was larger than my local church. It was larger than my family, that it was a worldwide thing, and that God was working in not only in this little place where I was from, but from a larger perspective. And then those churches helped me to connect, to see that it was more than just the United States, to see that it was all over the world, so that God was active. And so just being in the midst of worship and among others in fellowship with other people, I learned a lot about how God is working in the world today.
Powerful. Absolutely. Absolutely. Another thing that comes to my mind is how frequently in my interviews with adolescents, testimony came up. I
Yeah,
wonder if you had that experience as well, and how you identify the role of testimony in
abs-
helping adolescents to make the connection between God's action in the church and in the world.
that is an excellent question, because yes, I in some of the interviews I recall some the role of testimony coming up on more than one occasion. And the role of testimony for me, and I have written in another place about testimony as Christian education, because the power of people telling stories, not just stories, but the truth about their own lives, and how that how those stories have helped form them in the faith. Those stories, those testimonies have become extremely important. So much so that in raising my children, and I made it a point that that I would tell them stories, and it was part of the testimony. So much more so that my daughter used to tell me, "Daddy, you ought to write a book. You have so much to say about these things." But it's true. It's the testimonies that and that have made. I think that have part of my for faith formation has come as the testimonies of others who have come forward.
It seems to me, as I think about this topic, God's action in the world,
Yeah,
beyond the church, I think of the ways in which the Black church genuinely lives in one reality, that church and world are not separate. And as we think about the way that adolescents are formed, I think this idea that that spirituality is somehow separate from the
yeah.
rest of our lives is something that kind of falls away,
Oh,
because we see God active in the whole of life.
absolutely. I'm 100% included in that. Man, that's the whole the African understanding of no dichotomy in the secular and the spiritual is very much so true in the African American church. And that's why you see many people involved in political rallies, social, economic issues, though there's no hesitancy about that, because that's part of who we are. I mean, that's what the life is. We don't leave we don't leave church on Sunday without a witness in the world the rest of the week. Yeah.
Absolutely powerful statement. As the conversation continues with this small group that's studying this book, I want to encourage you all to be thinking about the ways in which that line is blurred between church and world, between God, sacred and secular. And as you think about that, be thinking about how that forms adolescence in your church and how you can help to foster it. We hope you have a great conversation. Thanks for joining us.